Hello, I'm Vaughn Albury.
And I'm Adama Williams. Welcome to Table Talk Unplugged. It's a 30-minute television show produced by the Communications section of the Ministry of Education, where we delve into issues of education featuring key persons and stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Adama. Indeed, traditional education hit the brakes in 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic impacted countries across the globe, bringing economies and daily life to a virtual standstill. Schools were also closed for face-to-face instruction. Coincidentally, new forms, or perhaps I should say, non-traditional forms of education came to the fore following the closure of brick and mortar school buildings to prevent the spread of the virus that has killed more than 2 million people worldwide.
Schools reopened on October 5th of 2020. And on February 23rd of this year, schools on New Providence, Abaco, Eleuthera, and Exuma resumed face-to-face instruction using the hybrid model. Indeed, education has recorded many firsts during this pandemic. Our guest today is the man responsible for guiding the Department of Education to meet its goals today and beyond. He is Mr. Marcellus Taylor, the Director of Education for the past 3 years. Mr. Taylor, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Indeed, welcome, Mr. Director. Education is now a human right, and it is generally acknowledged that education empowers. Tell us about the Department of Education's mission to meet the changing needs of today's students.
Yes, well, for some time the department has been thinking about this, what kind of student we want to produce and how we go about producing that student. And so we have crafted a profile of the ideal graduate. And as a matter of fact, I think we have it posted in every classroom so that children can know from day one what it is that they're supposed to aspire to be. And in that profile, we talk about a student who is not only literate and numerate, but also has literacies across the board in ICTs and other areas. We also talk about someone who is environmentally sensitive. We also talk about someone who is culturally aware. So we're trying to create a well-rounded person who can be a good citizen and who can contribute towards the development of the country. We have created a Bahamas High School Diploma, which reflects that. Because in the Bahamas High School Diploma, you know, it's not just what your GPA is. It's also, you also must meet some other goals and some other targets. And that's reflecting this well-rounded person. And so we have a goal that by 2030, 85% of those who leave our schools should be graduates, and the graduates should match up with this profile. And so some of our main programs that we are advancing are geared towards doing this. So the thrust to make our schools smart schools, as the minister calls them, that are connected to high-speed internet, that has Wi-Fi all over, that permits people to get access to the World Wide Web readily, is one of those ways we're going to do that. Also, the thrust to reform and revise our curricula on a regular basis so that they are relevant and rigorous and appropriate for the learning needs of students is yet another way. And so our whole agenda in the Department of Education is based on trying to produce that ideal student in the numbers that we need to produce them, 85% of the cohort by the year 2030.
You addressed the 2019 Bahamas Business Outlook seminar, and you told attendees of the changing trends in education, including the upgrade of the technology division, the pivot to remote learning via education's virtual school platform. You also invited corporate Bahamas to provide electronic devices to our students. And this was in early 2019, before Hurricane Dorian and the pandemic. Your view then and the changes brought on by the twin crises shows to me that you appeared prescient in your forward thinking. What have you done? What would you have done differently if you can go back to that time, early 2019?
I think that's a difficult question because, of course, you cannot really go back. But, you know, perhaps we would have made a stronger appeal to people to understand what the possibilities were and to prepare them more readily and more earnestly for the challenges. So it is a little regretful that although we were doing quite a bit of work with teacher preparation in terms of professional development in the area of ICTs, that we didn't do more of it before the pandemic hit. Yes. That would have made us more ready. I think that might have been the biggest actual challenge, that we had to get teachers ready. I think we did a very good job in providing them with training after it came. Another thing I believe is, even internally within the Ministry of Education, creating a greater understanding of that thrust for us to move to have a digital platform. We had to, at a sort of last minute, up our game in terms of the EMIS and LMS. Yes. So we could have been perhaps a little bit more prepared in those areas. But of course, if there is any good thing coming out of COVID-19, is all of these areas where we were hesitant or didn't quite see the relevance to it. COVID-19 caused us to see that all those things were not only possible, but they were very relevant and necessary. So, yeah.
Yes, but I would give the Ministry and Department of Education a bit more credit, because for years I've heard the Ministry encouraging teachers, encouraging technology, and promoting the integration of technology into lessons.
Oh yes, you're quite right. I joined the staff of headquarters back in 1999, and the very first project I worked on was a project to put an EMIS in schools. 1999. Mm-hmm. And it took us 20 years before we could do it with a kind of global coverage. We've had, training. I was a part of a group that developed a training sponsored by OAS, where we trained teachers in basic computer literacy from 2002. And we've been doing all of these things. Mm-hmm. We've upped it in the last several years. And so I want to be clear that what you see us have now is really an accumulation of efforts over the last 2 decades.
Agreed.
But of course, COVID-19 really brought everything to a head, and brought it to a head very quickly, mm-hmm. which was good.
And speaking of teacher readiness, what grade would you give teachers during this pandemic? Because I know I've heard you comment on quite a few occasions where you spoke about the ingenuity, the innovation of our teachers, and as you mentioned just now, it forced them to go even beyond what they were regularly used to. So what grade would you give them?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about grades. I was a teacher once ago, but I've been out of teaching for a long time, so I'm not so sure I know how to grade people. That's my way of getting out of that question. But, I think people have risen to the occasion. I think there are a segment of teachers who had a lot of resolve, a lot of resilience, who led the way. There are some others who were a lot more fearful and a lot more, I guess, overwhelmed by the circumstances. But what I like most is the fact that those who were able and those who could, they took the mantle, and they helped us to lift the system up and carry it to where it needed to be. For me, we would like more and more people to come on board, but I understand that some people are at different points of development. But it's our expectation that as we go along, that more and more people come in, and people realize that it's their duty to get up to speed so that they can come into the new era of what you need to do now as a teacher in the Bahamas.
Mm-hmm. And shifting gears a bit, let's look at the protocols that the Ministry and Department have put into place throughout our schools. Are you satisfied so far with the health protocols put into place? And our teachers, especially those with comorbidities, are they now more comfortable coming back into the school system?
Well, I am very satisfied with the protocols that we put in place, but more than that, the equipment and the supplies that we were able to disseminate to schools. I think, quite frankly, it might go around. I think people were quite surprised with the response of the ministry in terms of providing the protocols, but also providing the equipment and the supplies. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it ought to be. But what we did was we put priority, as we say, safety first, even though education always. So we took resources from everywhere and put it where we needed to put it to make sure that people feel safe. I don't know how every teacher feels, but in my moving around, teachers seem to be generally quite comfortable with how safe the school environment is at this point in time.
There you go. Well, on that point, Director, you bring us to our first break, but we still want to talk a little bit more about the health and safety protocols and other subjects. You're watching at Table Talk Unplugged. There's still much more to come. There are more than 150 Ministry of Education schools across the Bahamas, comprising 11 districts. Do you know which district your school is in? Here is how to find your school. Step 1. Go to the Ministry of Education Bahamas.com website. Step 2. Click on the Schools tab on the main menu. Step 3. Navigate to your school's district. Let's use C.R. Walker Secondary School as an example. C.R. Walker is a school in the New Providence Northern Secondary Schools District. Click on the New Providence Northern Secondary Schools District. Step 4. Navigate to the C.R. Walker icon and click. That leads to C.R. Walker's webpage and Facebook page. There you will find pertinent information regarding C.R. Walker. Using these steps, you can find information on all public schools nationwide. Remember, stay informed. Stay in the know.
Welcome back to Ed Table Talk Unplugged. We're speaking with the Director of Education, Mr. Marcellus Taylor.
Well, Mr. Taylor, we were talking about health and safety protocols by the Ministry of Education in conjunction with the Ministry of Health to mitigate cases of COVID-19. Do you anticipate that there will be cases in schools now that we've reopened for hybrid, so there are some days children go to school? Do you anticipate cases?
Well, we have to anticipate is whether or not we expect any at this point in time. We don't expect any cases if there isn't a huge proliferation of cases in the general population. But if we get to the point where we start to see cases popping up in the community, we would expect that we would have some cases on campus. We have a protocol in place to deal with any suspected cases. And so all of our principals and school administrators, they know what to do. Essentially, that protocol involves us engaging with two other public entities. On the one hand, the public health professionals in the surveillance unit who would deal with the medical side of things, and then the Department of Environmental Health,
Yes,
who will deal with the cleanup and the environmental part of things.
Okay.
Yes, and Director, teacher shortages is a global problem, worldwide problem. What is the ministry department doing to address this challenge? Just earlier this week, there was a report on the news about teachers in Eleuthera, I think WIMS despite Eleuthera, just protesting that there are enough, I think it was the parents, not the teachers. Parents are protesting that there is a shortage of teachers and they need their children need to learn. What is the department doing to address that issue?
Yeah, well, we're engaging 3 strategies to deal with teacher shortages. The first strategy is to look at the teaching force that we now have and their deployment, and matching that with the enrollment and the subjects and the types of discipline that students at particular schools must learn, so that we are right-sizing the teacher force so that we have the appropriate number of teachers at at particular schools. Over the years, we've had some kind of wastage, if you use it in a kind of economic term, where we have more teachers at one school than we need and fewer teachers at another school. So we're trying to right-size, move teachers around so that we make that comment. So that's one exercise. Another strategy that we're engaging is one of amalgamation of schools, where what we're doing, especially in the more remote areas, is we are bringing schools together so that we can maximize the teachers that we have and also the resource of the school campus and so on. And we've been able to think over the last year or so, amalgamate about 13 or 14 schools in the Family Islands.
You met some opposition to that, though.
Yes, of course. That's part of the territory in a sense.
Part of the process.
Because people gain emotional attachments to things like schools and so forth, and we understand it. And so one of the things we're trying to do to mitigate against this feeling that the government is abandoning them is to use those vacant schools for, important purposes so that the community doesn't die. It still has a life. So for instance, in Abrahams Bay, Meguana, we closed the school there, we moved all the children to Pirates Well. But what we did with the school in Abrahams Bay is we worked along with local government, and it's now the now the office administrator on the island and local
Gotcha.
government. So
Yeah.
it's being used for good purpose. Anyway, to revert, the third strategy that we're engaging in is a strategy of the virtual school and using virtual instruction in order to fill gaps. And so again, in small family islands where we don't have enough teachers to go, or where it wouldn't be feasible to send teachers because of the numbers, we are still ensuring that the children get an opportunity to a well-rounded education by providing virtual instruction.
And shifting gears again, homeschooling.
Right.
Homeschooling seems in recent times to have been growing very popular. I'm sure probably the reason for this is, good example, COVID-19, parents not feeling comfortable sending their children out to the mainstream classrooms. How is the Department of Education ensuring that standards, the proper standards are being met?
Yes.
Yes. Well, that was when I talk about when I came into the ministry first. This was the second project I worked on, developing a plan for homeschooling. And it took us about 16 years in order to actually come up with a homeschool unit to address this whole issue of homeschooling. Our approach to homeschooling, I think, is one that is reasonable, one where we are giving the parent the right to educate their child, but also putting mechanisms in place to ensure that the right of the child to an education is not being encumbered. So we're not very heavy-handed on what standards there should be, like, oh, the child must have a 3-point GPA or anything like that. But we do have a process that parents must go through in order to make us aware of what will be done. And also parents have to agree in order for them to engage in the homeschooling that their children's work should be recorded, that they are subject to random inspections, schoolhouse visits, and so forth, so that we can ensure that both things happen: the right of the parent or the ability of the parent to carry out their duty to educate their child in the way that they feel is most appropriate, but also that the right of the child is protected.
Who are these persons, who are these stakeholders starting these new schools? And is there data to show how children who are homeschooled fare against public school students and private school students? Is there data?
All right, but let me clarify something. Homeschooling is not the same as a small school that caters to children.
We get that confused sometimes.
Yeah. Homeschooling is when the parent has the primary responsibility for providing the instruction.
Their children.
Yes. They can bring in a tutor or some people to help, but the parent must be like the principal, let's say, for instance. They must be the one to determine what the curriculum will be like, and if they're going to use anyone, who those persons are. And if they're not satisfied with that person, they can dismiss that person right away. They have to be in full control of what is happening. The data on homeschooling is not very robust, but what we do know is that there is a range of students in terms of their ability. In the beginning, when homeschooling first started, people sort of had the notion that all children who homeschool would do very well.
Yes.
And we had some homeschoolers who were doing very well, so I'm not diminishing that at all. But I think the decision by a lot of parents to homeschool is not solely grounded on academic basis. Some of it is due to religious considerations or socialization issues. Some of it is also based on economic decisions. The parents don't necessarily want to send their children to government schools, but they don't want to pay the fees for private schools. And so we see a range of performance. We do have at examination and assessment a registration where they enter, and we see how those students perform. But I think before we go publicly talking about the performance, because once you do that, you kind of give a mark or a scar on something when you say, oh, this group is performing better or worse. Mm-hmm. I think we would want to really see a longer term of a longer data set with information spreading over a much longer period of time. I wouldn't want to be unfair to them. Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, Director, I don't know if this is an old topic or what, but the LMS. Yes. The LMS, is it meeting expectations at this point?
And tell our audience what LMS is.
Right, so LMS is an abbreviation for Learning Management System. It's a software that enables you to be able to manage the teaching and learning process online. When we started out, if you will recall, we only just procured that LMS sometime around July of 2020. And on October the 5th, when students tried to log on, there was a kind of glitch in the system. It took a day or so to resolve. But this was not what we wanted to happen. But given the fact that this was a LMS that was being customized by us, and we know that, you know, in all of these things, as you go along, you will troubleshoot and see some problems and fix them and improve and enhance them as you go. We accepted that that was something that could happen in that process. Since then, we have had a few interruptions. The last interruption we had was on the same day when the Broward County school system had a big glitch in their system. So these things happen not just in the Bahamas, but all over. But for the most part, it has been working quite well. Enhancements have been made, and I think more teachers are more comfortable and satisfied with what is happening. Good. And as we go along, we'll continue to refine.
Well, Director, thank you so much. It's time now for our second break. We'll talk more with the Director, including national examinations. You're watching Table Talk Unplugged. Stay with us. The Ministry of Education, in conjunction with the Ministry of Health, advises students, teachers, administrators, and staff to adhere to the following steps in an effort to minimize the risk of COVID-19, also known as the coronavirus. Step 1. Be sure to wash hands before and after you eat, after using the bathroom, touching money, shaking hands, or emptying the trash. You may also use hand sanitizers throughout the day. Frequently wash hands with soap and water for 20 seconds and rinse with clean water. Dry hands with clean paper towels. Step 2. Cough or sneeze into your elbow or sleeve and not into your hands or into the ear. Or cover your nose or mouth with a tissue. Immediately dispose of the tissue into the trash. Be sure to wash your hands thoroughly afterwards. Step 3. Do not drink from the same cans, bottles, or cups of other persons. Do not share eating utensils, such as forks and spoons. Do not share school supplies, such as pencils or pens. Step 4. Germs can live on many surfaces. Be sure to wipe and disinfect desks, school supplies, railings, and other surfaces that are regularly touched by others. Step 5. Avoid close contact with anyone who is coughing and sneezing. Let's do what we can to help minimize the risk of the coronavirus.
Welcome back to our final segment of Ed Table Talk. We're speaking with the Director of Education, Mr. Marcellus Taylor. Director, the 2021 national examinations are upon us yet again for 2021. What are your expectations this year for these exams?
Well, you know, we've had quite a number of students enroll in the exams. The numbers are just slightly fewer than what we had last year. But, you know, that's to be expected for a couple of reasons. One, the cohorts seem to be getting a bit smaller. And then two, you know, some students may not have felt that they were ready, and so they didn't sign up. Our general expectation in terms of student performance is we believe that students who put the work in can still do well. We do know that there will be some students who have not put sufficient work in. But, you know, I make a plea at this point in time to students and parents to realize that you still have quite a bit of weeks ahead, and preparation is, a lot of that is in your power. Clear of COVID-19, all students who would be taking BGCSE, for instance, would have had at least a year and a half's worth of work. They've also been engaged in learning from October of this year, albeit it may not be perfect circumstances, but you know, we talk about resilience, we talk about pushing through, we talk about being the best, and this is what you do. You have to make it happen. And so parents, please ensure that your students develop study timetables and make sure that they prepare themselves. And students, it's up to you.
That's true. It is up to them. You've already acknowledged that 12th graders have had an unusual year. 10 years from here, most people wouldn't even remember COVID-19 when they come to compare their results. Will there be changes to the Bahamas High School diploma requirements to show that there something unusual happened?
Right. Well, we're not going to change requirements. What we might do is we might put the requirements in context. And what I mean by that is this. Students, for instance, in New Providence were not attending the face-to-face school. And so the issue of punctuality may be a mute one, you know. Also, there might be, you know, some other facet that because of the change, students would not have been able to do. And so adjustments would be made, reasonable adjustments would be made on prorating or whatever, so that we could keep that in the right perspective. But we have to be very careful about manipulating the criteria for any kind of credential that we provide. Because once you get a criteria, once you get a credential, that credential is there for life.
For life.
And so when we say that someone has meet whatever standard, that standard, people have to know that you are able to carry that out 10 or 15 years later. We can't water it down so that a COVID-19 student gets it who may not have really acquired the skills. And then that person now has a currency, a credential that they use. Because what will happen is if people get a credential that they cannot back up, then the credential's value diminishes. It's almost like having a counterfeit money.
Yes.
You know, the paper is not worth what it's saying that it's worth. And so we have to be careful of that.
Okay, and with that said, we are winding down now. The school year is almost done. So at this point, you've done a little bit of that already, but offer our parents and students advice for the rest of this year.
Well, as I've already said, but I would say to all parents and all students, you know, we know that it's been difficult. We know that it's been a hard year. But, you know, education, not only is it a right, it's the thing that empowers people. So we could look at all of the circumstances and we could say, you know, it's difficult, so let's just give up. But then what does it mean for future life? So we have to support one another and have resolve to push through and carry through. And the Department of Education and the Ministry of Education generally are prepared to support in as many ways as possible. We have counseling and other things. We have relaxed rules on uniform wearing. We try to provide devices, so you can see that we have been trying to do our part as much as we can to help. And all we ask you to do is to do your best, you know, in enabling the children to get the best out of the opportunities that are being provided.
But last question, what do you tell those who have dropped out, those who have not even tried to go to school?
But it's still not too late. And, you know, as time goes on, we're going to try and see what we can do in terms of providing some remediation for those children who've kind of fallen off the radar. But, you know, while you're young, while you're in this phase of life, your main preoccupation should be empowering yourself through education. And so come back in and we will work with you to try and get you up to speed.
Well, Director, we want to thank you for being a guest and thank you for leading the charge in the Department of Education. Your role is very important and like you've always said, it's teamwork. So thank you for leading the charge. Again, parents, it's important that you play your role as education is everyone's business.
Yes, indeed. And if you would like to receive updates on what's happening at the Ministry of Education, visit our website or hit us up on Facebook, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and other social media platforms. Again, on behalf of my co-host, Mr. Vaughan Albury, thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.